mechanism design is that you want a certain behavior to arise, right? If you want to organize, a societal structure or something, you want to have some orderly behavior to arise, right? Because it is important for your goals. But you know that people, they don't care what my goals are. They care about maximizing their utility. So, put it crassly, making money. The more money, the better, so to speak. Right? I'm exaggerating. But
self-interest in whatever
self-interest
in whatever way they.
So what you want to do is ideally, what you want to do is to design a game so that while people play it so to maximize their self-interest, they achieve the social goal and behavior that I want. That is really the best type of thing. And it is a very hard science and art to design these games.
Hi, I'm Wesley, and I'd like to talk about my pay-to-earn game project. This is a little bit different from a lot of other pay-to-earn games that have been developed that are largely based on speculation and virtual assets. This project is an attempt to use human-based computation for agricultural robotics, and in particular for managing permaculture systems. So the modern world has largely experienced a move towards urbanization, and this is an interesting phenomenon in that it creates both a lot of opportunity and a lot of inequality. And one of the problems with urbanization is that it causes landlessness and less access to self-reliance. So going from this idea of urbanization, how can people be self-reliant for food when living in an urban area? And one way is to do urban farming, but there's definitely a lot of lack of farmland to do that. But there's a certain radius around cities which could be used for farming. And furthermore, my hypothesis is that people within cities are capable of farming hundreds of miles away, potentially. So this is the idea, of course, of agricultural robotics. And there's a lot of companies moving towards autonomous machines that perform work in agriculture and in all sorts of fields. One of the reasons why agriculture is slower is because there's a lot more complexity and diversity in terms of harvesting certain types of plants. And so you can see, like, for example, there are concerns about the labor and agricultural needs. This is because, like, a decline in fertility in developed countries. You can see, like, Japan, for example, has a high need for these sorts of robotic systems in the future if people are to sustain their current levels of well-being. So the agricultural market is deeply in need of greater automation. And although a lot of these companies are moving towards human-less systems, I think there's a great opportunity to use distributed ledgers to enable people to provide labor in exchange for self-sufficiency. And we're very interested in machines as a part of permaculture. Historically, industrial agriculture has largely been about monocropping and has been unsustainable and destroyed ecosystems. And so we think that permaculture is compatible with machines if the design of the machines and the incentives are correct. So the question is, how can we get people within cities to create permaculture systems in the outlying regions that are less populated. So one example of an outlying region is Factory Farm, which is part of the open source ecology project. It's about an hour drive away from Kansas City. And so what we've built here is we've prototyped a remote control tractor using various open source hardware. And it's basically an ESP8266 chip, but we can also use, for example, something like an FPGA and an open source router. And the long-term plan is to be able to start designing autonomous open source hardware machines that can create value remotely. We know that there is a trend towards remote work, so this is simply about providing the tools to create hardware goods in the physical world using video games. And so an example of doing that is using a video game environment as a simulator for a tractor. Or we think there are projects like ArduPilot, for example, but there's also going to need to be a human touch, and we think that can be done flexibly by people in cities. And so we've kind of developed the open source repositories for anyone to build, like, locally manufacture one of these micro tractors, or really any sort of machines you need to build a village. And so we are here. We can go to a micro tract. This is what it looks like. So there can be various remote functions, especially if you add in cameras on board, computer vision. There are lots of tasks which could be symbiotically performed by humans and AI. So there's a great amount of potential to gamify this, and an example of this is you just have to look at the FarmBot web app to see that this is very ripe for gamification, especially if you consider the complexity of permaculture systems and the ability of games to communicate and incentivize optimization patterns within complex systems. There are all sorts of complicated interrelated systems at play in nature, from like mycelium to like companion planting to different topology strategies, and I think these could be very well expressed within a game. Here's an example of some people on Permies talking about how robotics could be integrated into the future of permaculture. And so without further ado, let's dive into a demo in Unreal Engine of how Algorand can help build this future. Okay, so this is a demo I threw together in about one day in Unreal Engine. It's basically just driving one of these microtracks around an environment. And this same interface can be used to basically broadcast UDP signals to a real-life tractor. And if you correlate the terrain and height maps to the actual physical location, it's really not a far stretch to create a virtual simulated environment dynamically in real time, and to be able to interact like this with real hardware. So we have all the technical talent in terms of engineering. What we're lacking is funding and collaboration with artists or various other contractors to bring this project to a professional level of polish and to market. Our focus has been entirely technical, so we don't have a Discord server with 200 people waiting for an NFT airdrop. This is really just the beginning of a very long journey into open source hardware business models. In terms of using Algorand, there are lots of ways to do it, but the basic idea is you pay an Algorand standard asset for authorization to use these machines and to receive agricultural or biological byproduct futures, which can then be sold, and you can receive like cash for them, or you can just directly receive the products that you've helped develop near your city. Okay, this is the micro track. It looks a lot heavier in person.